Hey everyone, it's Gary here from Echidna Sewing, and today we're going to take a good close look at the Merilock MK480 4-thread overlocker. Now, overlockers are incredibly popular and they're a construction machine, and if you've used overlockers in the past, you know all the things that can be fun and not so much fun about them. Talking about threading for most people, we're going to dig into that and show you how easy this guy is to thread. But first, I want to go through the machine and explain just what a 4-thread overlocker actually is and what it does, and the features that you might want to look for. So, the MK480 by Merilock is made in Taiwan, so it's a really high quality product, and it's very, very well featured. So the first thing we should look at is the thread configuration. And this machine has 4 threads, like pretty much 95% of overlockers on the market. And a 4-thread overlocker in today's market is what we call a mock safety stitch. And I'll explain that when we do some stitching. But it can be run as either a 2-thread, a 3-thread, or a 4-thread machine. But for most people, you're going to use it as a 4-thread in most instances, because you'll use your overlocker to primarily construct garments. Some people just use them for finishing off edges, but they're a great construction machine, and particularly on knit fabrics because they have so much stretch in the seam. So Merilock, 4 threads, we've covered that. Nice thing about the threading path, and we're going to thread this very soon, but it's all color coded, so that's nice and easy. It's a very attractive machine, you know, it's a nice machine to look at, but one of the things that sets it off is the quality of the engineering and the plastics and the fit and finish on this machine. It uses a new matte finish on all the plastics, which is just stunning, and it just looks classy. And the fit and finish is excellent. All the bits go together correctly, and I've got to tell you, as a mechanic myself, there's nothing more frustrating when you're servicing a machine and they just don't go back together correctly. These things go back superbly and everything clips in where it's supposed to. So the quality of the plastics is exceptional. It is also a free arm machine, and that's great. So that little cover there comes off, and that exposes a really nice, small, compact free arm. So that's great for doing tubular work, particularly around hems and sleeves and collars and that sort of thing. So really, really cool there, and that just pops straight back on. It does come standard with the little catcher here for your waist or your trimming waist, and that just pulls off like so. We'll take that away for a minute. As we look at further features on the machine, pretty much all overlockers have these standard features. So stitch length control, if we just turn that around a wee bit, is right here. Differential feed control, nice and easy to get to. Hand wheel, of course. Come back a bit, you'll see it says LED sewing looper. One of the nice things about this machine, finally, we've got an LED light in the looper area, so that makes threading this machine even easier. And wait till you see how easy the looper is to thread. That's superb. Really nice, compact little sort of tool storage section here. So this is great. You got your tweezers, your screwdriver for changing your needles. Needle threader, a little brush, a 2-thread looper attachment, and the needles that come standard. And it uses a standard EL705 needle, so always available, easy to get. And that's pretty much the core of the machine. Obviously, it comes with a foot control, and we'll pop that back over here for a minute. An instruction book, as you'd expect. Some extra sort of spool caps and things to hold the threads in place, and a dust cover. Now, you'll notice I'm using 4 different colors on here. And the reason I'm doing that is so when I go through and show the threading, you'll understand how an overlocker actually works, particularly if you've never used one before. The reason I've got these 4 colors is they also match the color coding on the machine. Now, normally when you're overlocking, you're going to use, for many people, these white and black and just kind of make that work for most projects. But it's okay to use different colored threads. It's okay to use, you know, all sorts of different types of threads. I'm actually stitching with embroidery thread here. This is Hemingworth 5000 meter embroidery thread. It's good for overlocking, actually. It works well. It's a strong thread, and most of you would probably have lots of colors that you could draw from if you've got an embroidery machine as well. So, but I could also use this to standard overlocking thread, or, you know, a nice sewing thread. It really isn't that fussy. Overlockers, and particularly this one, aren't too fussy on threads. They'll use pretty much anything you give to it, except for the really cheap stuff. You know, there is cheap and nasty thread out there, so you don't particularly want that. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly stitch down a seam on this piece of fabric. It's just a simple woven fabric, and we'll have a look at the stitch and how it forms, and then we'll rethread the machine. and I'll show you how easy it is. So right now it's a double layer. I've already got the machine threaded, and I'm just going to grab my foot control, there it is, and start sewing. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got there. Beautiful quality stitch. Now this is a standard 4-thread stitch, and you'll see there's 2 needle threads. That's the orange or the gold and the blue, and then there's a green thread on top. That's the top looper thread, and then there is, if we turn it around, there's a red thread underneath, and that's the bottom looper thread. And that's why I put different colors on there, so you can understand what we're actually looking at. So let's have a look at what that actually means. If we were to open up that seam, we've got a lovely firm seam finish here, and we've got a perfectly covered and trimmed edge on the outside of the seam. And in most cases, just for the normal clothes that you wear day to day, that seam strength is perfect. If you were making a tailored garment, for instance, you probably would want to run another seam stitch to give you some seam allowances, and you might only use a 3-thread overlocker to neaten up the edges. But in the main, for day-to-day wear, a 4-thread mock safety stitch is a great stitch. So that's what it looks like. Now, I'm going to do something that most people will shudder at the thought of. I'm going to go across and I'm going to cut all these threads. There we go. And I'm going to lift my presser foot. I'm going to grab my little tweezers out of here. And I'm going to grab that thread and essentially pull it all the way through, and I've pulled all the threads out of the machine. There they are. So the machine is now unthreaded. So don't have a heart attack or a panic attack. It's not that hard. I'm going to go through step by step and show you how to thread this. Now, golden rule with overlockers is ideally thread your loopers before you thread your needles, and that'll make sense as we go through it. Now remember I said your looper thread, you got the red and the green are the looper threads. Now the loopers are these guys here. And if I turn this machine by hand, these are the loopers here. This is the top looper, this one that goes up and down there, and this is the lower looper. And it's normally the lower looper that most people struggle with for threading. So I'm going to start from right and go to left, and we'll start with this red one. Now, of course, pull the thread up, go through the little hole at the top on the thread stand. That makes sense. And there's a little clip on the top. It's really easy to see. You won't need to worry about me not showing you that in too much detail. It clips in. Now, when the presser foot is in the up position, which it is now, this has a tension release mechanism, which means all the tensions are released. So when I pull that thread down into the corresponding tension device, it should go into the tension quite easily. But a little tip, it's a good idea when you pull the thread into the tension, always to hold the thread there and give it a pull here and just make sure that it's in there correctly. If you've had an overlocker sitting idle for several months, there's often what happens is the tension discs kind of get stuck together and they need to be sort of opened again. And doing what I just did, a little pull on the thread there will often do that. Now, a little tip also, always have a pair of tweezers handy because they are pretty useful when you're threading an overlocker. Not that I couldn't do it without it, but it is handy. So I'm going to now follow the threading path. There's also a little indicator here that indicates this is the lower looper. It actually is a picture of the lower looper, the upper looper, the right needle, left needle, etc. And there is a little threading diagram underneath this part here. And of course, the instruction book has all this repeated in a bigger, more detailed scenario. So I'm going to follow the guide here. Now, I am not sitting in front of the machine, so I'll try my best to keep my hands out the way. Apologize if I can't do that because it is a little bit difficult when you're not sitting in front of it, but we'll do our best. Now, thread comes down to this guide here. That's clearly indicated on the guide, on the diagram. And then you'll see there's two little red dots there, and that corresponds to the little eyelets on these take-up levers, and that's what these are called, take-up levers. And I'm going to, or take-up guides rather, not levers. And I'm going to hook the thread into the two little red guides there. And this is where the magic happens. The lower looper is always the most difficult looper to thread on an overlocker. And this one has a very beautiful design by Merilock. It's a little guide that actually pops up to thread the looper automatically, the back part of the looper, where most people struggle because you've kind of got to get the thread in and hook it into a little hook, and it can be difficult. Certainly on older overlockers, it was sometimes near impossible. One of the tips I've found in threading this particular overlocker is I like to disengage the little rolled hem guide. So it's just this little lever here, and I just pull that back just while I'm threading the lower looper. I find it's easier to do that. And you'll see now that I can actually push this lever all the way up, and we'll get some real detailed shots of that in a moment. But what I do is I just simply hold my thread in here, push this lever up, whoops, even I make a mistake every now and then, hold that thread there, push that up, and now the looper, the back part of the looper is now threaded. I haven't had to get a pair of binoculars out or a monocle or something and sort of dig in to find that, that looper hole. Once that is done, I just trim it back to a nice shorter tail, and there's a little tiny eyelet in the looper there, and I just pop that in there like that and pull that thread down, and I just leave that there. The lower looper is, or the right looper is now threaded. So let's have a look at the next one. So same deal, take the thread up through the little eyelet at the top and then into the little guide before it comes into the tension. Again, give it a little pull there to make sure it's in the tension correctly, and this, just follow the diagram. Don't worry about where your red thread's sitting, it's not going to get in the way. We'll pull that a bit back there and hook that into the two guides, one there and one there. And this one, if we just turn our wheel a wee bit more, there's a little guide right here, and we're going to now tuck that into there, and then we'll cut off that little end, and then there's a little hole in the upper looper right there, and we just pull that through there. Make sure we haven't got it caught anywhere we don't want it to be caught. There it is, and that upper looper is now threaded. So that is both loopers threaded. And you know, it's like riding a bike. Once you do that a couple of times, it's super easy. It really is. The good thing about this is with that extra little lever to thread the lower looper, it takes the hardest part of the whole process completely out of play. You don't have to worry about it or get too concerned about it. So the loopers are now threaded. Now we're going to thread the needles, and I'm going to pull this around a wee bit here. I am also going to do something here. Again, this is just a tip. I find it easier to do this because this machine comes with a really handy little needle threader device. I like to disengage the cutting blade. Now, all overlockers have an engageable or a disengageable cutting blade, and that's the blade here. And this is actually one of the, I think, the advantages on the Marilock overlocker. This blue arm here is actually the driving arm that drives the cutting blade that cuts the fabric. And this is what we call a top drive cutting blade system. And it's very, very common on commercial overlockers. They pretty much all have this system. Some overlockers have a little blade that is pulled up from underneath, and you don't have this arm there at all. So with this one, to disengage the blade, you just simply push that across. Just turn that up a bit and pull it around, and I can raise that all the way to the top or all the way around to the other side, and it's completely disengaged. But remember, if you disengage the blade, make sure you re-engage it before you start doing your normal overlocking. I'm just going to leave it there for a moment, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to use the needle threader to thread the needles, and it's just a wee bit easier with that blade out of the way. So I'm going to now lower the presser foot again, and you'll be able to see the needles a wee bit better there. And actually, no, I'm going to lift it again because I haven't threaded up here yet. So again, take the next color, which is the blue, hook it into the appropriate guide, give it a bit of pull, make sure it's into the tension. Now this is the right needle, so we just follow the path, and there's a little guide in here. There's two little slides or little slots in there. Comes up into, there's only one slot here for both threads to go into. And you'll notice there's like a little pigtail type of guide here. So it goes into the right side of that, and then we hook it into the thread guide on the needle bar. And then using this handy little needle threader device, I just hook the thread into that, pull it down into the needle, push it through, and that has now been pushed through the needle eye. And if I grab my tweezers, I have now got the needle threaded. So I didn't even need to get in there and have a really close look at that needle eye. It's pretty simple. So that right needle is now threaded. So let's have a look at the left needle. Same deal. We'll take the thread from there, hook it in under the little guide here, give it a bit of a pull into the tension, and then follow it around through the basic threading path into the guide there, into the left-hand side of this little pigtail, into the needle bar guide, grab my needle threader device. Hook the thread in, put it over the needle, slide it into the needle eye. Thread's in the needle eye now. Grab my tweezers and pull that thread through. And that thread is all threaded now. So I've threaded my needles, I've threaded my overlockers. Now if you make the mistake of threading the needles before you thread the loopers and you happen to turn the wheel and the needle threads get caught around the looper and then you thread the looper, the very minute you start stitching on it, it's going to pull the threads out of the looper and possibly even out of the needles. So you don't really want to do that. Just follow the path that I just explained to you and it'll be great. Now, a lot of people then they panic and they think, well, what do I do with all this thread that's sitting here? Well, here's my tip, and I've been doing this for 40 years and it has never failed me. Just cut it back to a few inches of thread sitting there. Cut your needle threads back to a few inches. Just leave it sitting there. Don't do anything else. Close this door up. Oops. Remember what I said? If you disengage the blade, you've got to re-engage it. On this one, you just simply turn it around and re-engage it. I will also re-engage my rolled hem tongue, and that's all set to go. So now, just close that up. I'm going to grab this bit of fabric, and here's my tip to stop you ever having a jam up a thread when you've rethreaded the machine. Just grab a piece of fabric, bit of scrap, with your presser foot in the up position, just put that piece of fabric directly under the foot and under the needles, put the foot down, and then turn the wheel a few times towards you. Just get the stitches kind of forming, which they are now, and then once you've done that, just continue on sewing. And there we go. Perfect. Now you'll notice I've chained out there, so I've kept running after the fabric has come out from under the foot, and that's called chaining. And you can do that on an overlocker. It'll just keep stitching and creating this chain. These machines have a rather handy thread cutter on the side, so you can just simply pull that down there and cut it. Or if you're like me and a bit lazy and doing this for a long time, I'll do it this way. I just simply run under there, come around, back under the foot. And it's okay to do that because I said so. And I've been doing it for a long time. So that's how it is, how easy it is to thread this machine. And you got to admit that's not too complicated, is it? And if you've never used an overlocker before, all you have to do is exhibit a little bit of common sense and it will work. So that's threading. Let's talk about what else this overlocker can do. And sometimes it's you know, the variations of fabrics that you may want to stitch on, and you can stitch from the lightest sheer fabrics through to heavy knits. Even denims can be stitched on this overlocker. It does take a standard EL705 overlock needle. I've got size 90 needles in there at the moment. Anywhere between size 70 and 90 is probably where you want to be. You very rarely would want a heavier needle. Size 90, of course, is a fairly heavy needle. But I'm just going to grab a bit of fabric and show you some things. I find this amazing. People often don't try stitching lightweight fabrics. This is a bit of simple crystal organza. I'm going to double it over and I'm going to stitch and then make a seam on that organza. So we've gone from a fairly sort of benign woven fabric here. Let's have a look at this guy, and 2 layers of organza, crystal organza. I haven't changed anything, and again, I'm not sitting in front of it, so excuse me if I don't go too straight. And there we go. So a perfect stitch on a piece of crystal organza from a standard woven fabric without adjusting anything. And I've also got, and I just messed around with this before, a rather heavy piece of towel here. So, whoops, even with a bit of stabilizer still stuck in it. I've already run a seam on it. Now I'm going to probably just run down this side. I don't need to run the whole thing. But without me having to do anything terribly much at all, it's just going to, I don't have to do anything. It's going to stitch perfectly. But here's a tip. If you've got a thicker piece of fabric, don't try and force it in under the presser foot. Just lift the presser foot with the front of with your thumb, a little bit at the front, and then the machine will grab it and take it in. So let's have a listen to that. Now this is quite thick. This is, in fact, it's very thick. But I haven't done anything, haven't changed anything. And that has given us a perfectly balanced stitch right on the end, so the looper threads are all meeting at the end. When we open that up, we've got a really solid seam. A perfectly seamed bit of towel. So you know, that's pretty heavy. So going from a organza through the standard woven fabric onto a towel. And of course the other thing is knits, and this is a bit of an old t-shirt. So if we were to, I'll just try and find a seam on this and we'll just stitch over it just to show you. In fact, we'll create our own little seam down the side here. We might be wanting to pull that in. We'll just run in there. So, and this is quite a stretchy knit. Again, if I want to, I can lift my foot up. And a perfect stitch on a knit fabric. So people often say, oh, I don't want to touch the tensions on an overlocker. To be honest, if you've got a good overlocker and you're using relatively good thread and it's all set on the normal positions and you've threaded it correctly, you'll rarely have to touch your tension. It's only when you're doing extreme things or using, you know, some real variable threads, you might want to tweak it a little bit. The book explains it. We're always there to help you, of course, but more often than not, you don't need to touch it. So that's a beautiful knit seam there, and that's going to be more than secure. In fact, that's how they make most t-shirts, is using a 4-thread mock safety stitch. So so there you go. That's the basic stitching functionality on it. And what we might do now is we might have a closer look at two of the most popular alternate stitches that you're going to have on these overlockers, and that's a rolled hem stitch and possibly even a flat lock stitch. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the rolled hem function now. Rolled hem's really, really popular for giving you a beautiful, clean, delicate hem on lightweight fabrics, and is really, really commonly used. Now, to use a rolled hem, you've got to convert back to a 3-thread machine. In other words, we're going to remove one of the needles, and more often than not, you're going to really remove the left-hand needle. Now, again, on this machine, it's very easy. We've just got to take the little needle screwdriver out of here, and I'm going to just remove the left-hand needle. The first thing I'm going to do is I like to do this. I grab the thread that is not going to be used, which is going to be the gold thread. I just picked up the wrong one. And I just grab it back here. I know you can't see it, but it doesn't matter. You'll get to see what I'm doing here. And I just cut it back there. That means it's just sitting in the tension. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to unravel and get caught. And we'll take that thread out of play. I'm then going to raise the machine needle bar so as it's at the highest point, and using the needle screwdriver, I'm just going to undo the left-hand needle, and I'm going to take that out. A little bit more perhaps. There we go. Good thing to do is just to pop that up in the spool like that. And that just means that you're not going to lose it because the needle's still fine. I don't need to replace it. And now a little tip. Go back and then just gently tighten, don't tighten actually, just delicately nip up the screw that you just let go. Don't tighten it, just take it so as you could just feel it's almost about to tighten. You don't want that vibrating loose while you're doing a rolled hem and coming out and falling on the floor because they're really tiny, you'll never find it. Right, so we've done that, and now for rolled hemming, we can use any thread really. I'm going to run a little bit using the thread that I have on here, then I'm going to show you what it looks like using a what we call a bulked nylon thread, or a people call it woolly nylon. So, and it gives you a really nice finish. So let's just close that back up again and look at what we've got to do now to complete this stitch. Now a rolled hem's a very fine stitch, so the settings we're going to want to do or have is a stitch length that is quite fine. And generally speaking, we're going to take that down to about that 1, just between 1 and 2. And there's a little tiny sort of marker there that is actually for rolled hem. So it's kind of, that's where you want it to be, around just over 1. The differential feed, and I haven't explained that yet, but I'll do that a little later. I'm going to leave it on N for normal or neutral, whatever you want to call it. My stitch width, and I should point that out, we can adjust the cutting width on this machine, and that's the little gadget there. And that changes the position of the blade and how much fabric is going to be cut. Again, everything I'm showing you here is on all overlockers. It's not just the Merilock, it's just how overlockers are. Some are just easier than others. I'm going to leave that where I have it at the moment, basically on normal. And I'm going to leave the blade engaged. I'm going to close this back up. I'm just going to trim away that bit of orange thread that I've got there, or gold thread. Now, typically with rolled hemming, you're doing it on a single layer of fabric. So I'm just going to run down this fabric here. And what we actually want to happen here is we want the top looper thread, in other words, in this one, the green thread, to be beautifully wrapped around the edge of the fabric. And so to do that, this is where you will make tension adjustments. We don't want that top thread to be too tight. We want it, in fact, to be a little bit on the looser side. So we're just going to, we'll take that down to about 2, and we want the red thread, the bottom looper, to be dominant, and we want it to pull that green thread around so as it wraps around the fabric. So we'll take that up a little bit. I'm going to leave the needle thread where it is at the moment. We've got everything set. Let's see what's going to happen there. Oh, one more thing, and this is important. This little lever here is called the rolled hem tongue, and right now it's on the N setting, which is normal, but we want it to be for rolled hem, and there's an R right there on the needle plate. So we just pull that back, and what that does is it removes the little, what we call the chaining tongue, and it allows the thread to get pulled nice and tight around the fabric. Again, normal thing, that's what all overlockers have. Some overlockers you actually have to, physically remove the plate and change it. That's what's nice about this one. It's just one little lever that you flick. So that's kind of cool. All right, so let's see what we get there. We'll just pull that chain through as we go. I'm going to go a little bit smaller on my stitch length. And let's pull that around and have a look at it. So this is using just the embroidery thread, and it's given it that lovely fine little rolled hem there. You can see that you can't see hardly any red thread, and that's what we wanted. I'm just going to tighten that green thread up a bit so as I don't get any little sort of loopy bits. And let's see how that goes. Okay, I'll come all the way through. Now, that's okay, but it's not the ideal thread for a rolled hem because it's quite fine. So embroidery thread is quite fine. What we want to do is get a much more smooth, silky finish, and that's when we come in and use what we call this woolly nylon or bulk nylon thread. So I'm going to change that thread. Now you'll notice with this one, see how it's actually really fluffy? It's not a spun thread. You can never use this on a needle. It can only ever be used on loopers. And you don't want to thread this. If you're threading a machine and you want to use this, you should tie it on to the existing spool that's there. So let's do that. I'm going to take the green thread. I'm going to pull a bit of extra thread off the spool. In fact, I might even pull the spool right away. I'm going to cut that off, and I'm going to put my bulked nylon thread, and this is the upper looper that it goes onto. And I'm going to tie that in a quick knot, and it's fiddly stuff, so you've kind of got to work out the best way to do this. Okay, so we don't need any sort of special knot, but we do need to have a nice knot there, and a nice and tight knot at that. Now, some people will tell you can just run it through and that knot will go through, and often it will. However, you don't particularly want to take the chance. So what I tend to do is I tend to like to pull that thread through. So I bring my looper down to its bottom position. I'm going to raise my presser foot because that releases the tensions. And I'm just going to grab that looper thread from the looper eye. It's still threaded in the eye. I'm going to break that off and I'm going to pull that knot through. And you can see there it goes through the machine. There it is right there being pulled through. And yes, that came through all right. Now, once you're really proficient at it, you can probably just run it through. If you know you've tied a good knot, by all means, but I wanted to show you that if you don't want to do that, it's okay to pull that thread through. Now again, because we've now made a re-threaded, I like to just pop that fabric under the foot and turn the wheel a few times by hand just to get it all stitching nicely. And there we go. And you're going to see now, this is magic. This is what the woolly nylon does. it off up there this time, just because we can. And look at that for a finish, isn't that beautiful? Now, of course, I've got blue thread on the needle, so you would match the color of the thread to the nylon, but you've got this gorgeous rolled hem that's just the perfect seam. Gives you a great result, or the perfect hem. And great if you wanted to, if you're on stretchy fabrics, you can get lovely fluted rolled hems, and there's loads of videos online showing you how to do that sort of thing. And every overlocker pretty much can do it. This does it exceptionally well and very easily. So that is rolled hemming, probably the most popular other use for an overlocker. So rolled hemming, now let's have a look at flat locking, which is kind of like a decorative, almost like a top cover stitch as a decorative on panels and fabrics and so on. So I'll stop talking for a minute, I'll show you how it works. The thing we're going to do with that is, instead of using that woolly nylon, I'm actually going to use this decorative thread. Now this is the like a decor thread, or cameo I think it's called, but it's quite thick. You don't run this through your needle. Again, it's a decorative thread and it runs on your loopers. And again, it's the top looper that's going to be used to create the flat lock stitch. So I'm going to now grab a bit of that top looper thread again. I'm going to take that off and I'm going to tie on this next thread. Now it is much thicker than the woolly nylon, so I definitely do not like to run this through the machine. I prefer to pull it through and make sure that the knot has got through the correct way. So that's now on there and tied up nicely. I'll just trim off the extra thread, leave that sitting there. It's still, we're going to do for flat locking, we're still going to do a three thread and a single needle. I'm going to keep the same needle in there. I'm now going to do what I did before, just grab, I've got my lower looper down and I'm just going to pull that looper thread through. Might raise my presser foot, trim that away just there, pull the knot through. You can see it coming through now. You might need to give it a bit of a hand under that guide there because it is quite thick. And there it is. And it may or may not, no, that knot is too big to go through the looper eye. So we're going to trim that back. And you know, there's probably special knots you can make to make it a bit easier. But to be honest, for the time it takes just to rethread that looper eye, I'm not the greatest knot tyer in the world. Just pull that through there. And now that's threaded beautifully through the upper looper. We'll just cut that there. We'll close that off. Now, a flat lock is different, and we don't want the flat lock stitch to be really fine. I'm going to take it back to a normal, almost a normal stitch length about there. And I'm going to do it first, then I'm going to explain why we've done it. So the key with a flat lock stitch is, imagine I'm wanting to put a beautiful, like a laddered effect or a cover stitch effect down the center of that fabric. This is not a seaming stitch, and it's not a stitch where you want to cut the fabric. So I'm going to disengage the blade for this one. So I'll just pull that all the way up. Now when you disengage the blade, you've got to remember one thing. You can't run any fabric into the machine to the right of the presser foot. You will jam up your machine, so you can't do that. What we want is, we want the top thread to be formed like a ladder effect. So on this one, we are going to loosen that thread, the top thread down. We're going to loosen off the needle thread as well, and we're going to have a relatively, tighten the needle thread and a relatively lower looper thread. So we just grab our fold wherever we want our top effect to be. So I'm just going to run down this edge here. I'm not cutting the fabric, remember, so we're going to now lower the presser foot. And because I've rethreaded it, I'm going to just turn that over a couple of times by hand and start stitching through there. And I'll just get my tension set correctly. So we do want to tighten up that lower looper thread. I went the wrong way before, and we're going to loosen that right off. And I think we're going to loosen that guy off as well. being a bit careful here. And we'll just trim that off. And so when we open this out, this is the lovely effect we've got. It's called flat locking, and it gives you a beautiful effect. It gives you like a ladder underneath, but that flattens out, and it's a very, very popular, like a top cover stitch, and you'll find a lot of active wear and a lot of sportswear. It's a common approach, but it makes for great decorative overlocking as well. And you can use any type of stitch, any type of thread really, to get that effect. So flat locking and rolled hemming are the two most popular decorative stitches. There's a heap more, but you know, that's the main ones. And if I keep going, I could go for the next 2 hours on this machine. But we'll certainly try and do some more videos on other effects you can get, particularly given that there's a great range of presser feet available for the Meri-Lock machines, including elastic shirring, cording, blind hemming, beading, and taping. And there's also a fantastic accessory table that just sits on there like that, gives you a lovely flat surface to work on. But we'll do some more videos on that in due course. In the meantime, I hope that explains quite a bit about the Meri-Lock overlocker. One thing I didn't sort of dig into for you, and I will just quickly talk about it, is the differential feed. I am just going to re-engage my blade just so I remember to do that. And the differential feed, and it's a dial here, and what it means is all modern overlockers have two sets of feed teeth. In fact, if I pull this around here like this, you'll see. Camera guy might be able to see that. Right there, there's two sets of feed teeth. And when the whole machine is set on neutral or normal, those feed teeth feed at the same rate. If we change the differential feed setting to, let's go say to a lower number, 0.6, what that means is that the front feeder is going to feed less than the back feeder. And so you've got less fabric coming into the machine and more going out, so it's going to want to stretch the fabric. And you use that to compensate for fabrics that tend to want to pucker up, but you can also use it to purposely create fluted seams and all sorts of things like that. If I go the other way on the differential feed, the front feeder will actually feed more than the back feeder, and that's going to pull more fabric into the machine than is going out the back of it, and that will give you a gather, or it will help prevent stretch in fabrics that tend to have a natural tendency to stretch. So it's both a thing you can use decoratively, but also a facility you can use to prevent problems as well. So again, there's loads of information about that, but differential feed, pretty much every overlocker on the market has that. These are particularly easy to use, and you know, it's just another great feature. There is also a safety cutoff. If I was to try and sew on this machine now, nothing will happen because there is a safety mechanism on the door, and it won't sew when the door is open. So we'll pop that back up there. But that's it, folks. That's a pretty good wrap up on the Meri-Lock MK480. Great product. We're really, really happy with them. Sold tons of them, and just, you know, one of the simpler ones to use. So any questions? Give us a hoy, call us, email us, get us on Live Messenger, and ask whatever you like. And remember, we're always here to help you. So hope that's been informative for you. So happy sewing, and see you next time. Cheers.